this is Liz from People I Think Are Cool, a bi-weekly podcast where I interview my favorite creatives from across the globe. If you're looking for a dose of creative inspiration, then go to peopleithinkarecool.com or subscribe to People I Think Are Cool on iTunes and Stitcher.
You like film, from cult to classic, from blockbuster to B-movies. And there just isn't that one place with all the fan fervor and passion that's covering the kind of mad, diverse brilliance that you love.
Well, that's where you're wrong.
AfterMovieDiner.com is that fan-built movie nirvana just for you, featuring the sweet, sweet writings of the wife dork herself. AfterMovieDiner.com. Go there. Be the best you can be.
You are listening to the In the Mouth of Dorkness podcast, the official podcast of the Alamo Drafthouse, Winchester.
Welcome to another edition of the It Modcast podcast. Joining us is Brian Young, the Turtle Dork.
Happy Friday, everybody.
And also joining us is Lisa Gullickson, Wife Dork.
Happy Halloween!
And Brad Gullickson, Mouth Dork.
Happy Halloween, Michael.
Ooh, good one.
Billy Das, the Indie Dork.
Just hey, everybody.
Yep. And I'm Darren Smith, the Disco Dork, and welcome to another edition of the It Modcast podcast, Fistful Friday.
Pow, pow, power wheels.
What? TGIFF, MFers. Happy Friday, everyone.
Yes.
This Friday, in honor of the release of the new Halloween film, we have a fistful of overcoming trauma. Am I saying it correctly, Lisa? Okay.
Yes, for those of us who got to be cool kids and got to see it early at Fantastic Fest, we found it very inspirational.
Oh wait, that's all of you except for me.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, okay.
It's also not Brian. We're also shitting on Brian.
Yes.
Because you missed the
First half, yeah.
All right.
We're only half shitting on Brian.
There you go.
But full shitting on me.
Oh, yeah.
Yikes. Sorry. So some people got to see it early. And and we liked it. And needless to say, Billy, I think you'll enjoy it. I hope you'll enjoy it. Brian, hope you enjoy it. Actually, so you've all seen this already at this point in time, hopefully, right? And you loved it.
Saw it last night, Thursday night.
Sure, that's right.
That's when we record this Thursday night.
I'm still forming my opinion, that's all.
Oh,
It
okay.
takes- Exactly.
Gotcha. All right. So in the meantime, we got a fistful of overcoming trauma. All right. So Brian, start us off. You're number 5.
Okay, I'm actually going to give a little plug to our episode earlier this week when we did our Weekend Dork, which I was so happily to host. It was a lot of fun with Wife Dork, Mouth Dork. So during the Weekend Dork, I talked about a film called The Hate You Give. So I'm going to put this at my number 5 because thinking of this list, this is a new film, and ironically, it comes out actually in wide release this today as well as Halloween, where it's about Star Carter, who witnesses her friend get gunned down by a police officer. And I talked about it in our Weekend Dork, but the trauma that she deals with, not just experiencing that horrific event, but then the aftermath of that and everything that she has to try to tackle and come to grips with, and how that affects her, and then ultimately how she comes out of that in a positive way. So it's a movie that has stayed with me since I saw it, and I encourage people. It's out this weekend, so after you go see Halloween, go and do it. I don't know if it makes a good double feature, but go see The Hate You Give. And I didn't mention this on my Weekend Dork. I think I did, but I want to reiterate how amazing Amanda Steinberg is in this film. When people talk about Academy Awards and some of the best performances of the year, and granted, this is my personal opinion, I think she gives one of the best performances I've seen this year. She's a revelation, and she's going to be an actress that we are going to be talking about for an extremely long time, and that makes me excited. So please please go see The Hate You Give. It's one of my favorite movies of the year so far. And yes, that's my number 5.
You know what, B? You know she's my pick for Riri Williams. Like if and when Marvel
Oh,
does,
really?
yeah, that's if and when the MCU
Interesting.
gets to introduce Riri
That'd be
Williams,
cool. I
she's
could
my
see
pick,
that.
man.
I can see that.
Yeah. All right. Good pick. Wife Dork.
Yes.
What is your number 5?
So my number 5, I decided to go with a kind of an obvious pick, a classic pick, and it speaks to what pop culture thought was the best case scenario of overcoming trauma, and that is the character of Batman.
Oh, nice.
Right, because no matter which story you go with, his origins is always following the trauma of seeing both of his parents murdered, and he internalized a lot of that trauma, but from that he decided to use the powers for good and to fight criminals.
Right.
But he always has this dark aspect to him. He's always considered to be the darker side of comics, and he has this air of he can never be completely whole again, and he will never be happy, and he always has to keep this playboy face to the world, but down in his bat cave he is an unhappy and dissatisfied human being.
It's why Catwoman broke off their marriage, because she knew he needs his pain to keep avenging. And if he were to be happy with her, he would stop being Batman, and that would be a disservice to the world.
Oh, obviously.
Ugh.
I'm so sorry. Were you shipping them? Were they together forever?
Well, I mean, recently Tom King had created a really interesting relationship between the two, and that's why their marriage was thrown off, and I was really disappointed. I was looking forward to the Batman-Catwoman relationship.
Nothing dissolves a marriage like being a comic book character. Look at Spider-Man and Mary Jane.
Accurate.
That's pretty good.
Lisa, when you're thinking about Batman and overcoming trauma, is there a particular Batman that you are thinking about? A movie version or a comic book version? Animated version?
I can't help myself. I always go to the Christopher Nolan Batman in my head.
Well, I think Batman Begins is the only film really to deal with his trauma head on.
Right, and you get to see the
make it a
child.
focal point.
Yeah, so I tend to go towards the Christopher Nolan Batman. And I don't think I've ever read a comic that was like, this is Batman's origin story. Like, they all tend to flash back to that.
Yeah.
Sure.
But
Gotta go back to Crime Alley. The
Yep.
pearls!
So, yeah. But I think, in terms of presenting what a traumatized person is like in a best case scenario, Batman is pretty much the typical.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Brad, your number 5.
For my number 5, I am going towards Star Trek. And the Star Trek I'm going to pick is the most recent iteration, Star Trek Discovery. In season 1, we are introduced to the character of Michael Burnham, played by actress Sonequa Martin Green. And you learn over the course of this series that her parents were killed during a Klingon attack. She was raised by her stepfather, Sarek, who's the biological father of Spock. And in raising this human child under Vulcan logic, naturally, that's going to create some daddy issues. So there's the trauma that Michael Burnham is recovering from being a human who lost her parents raised on Vulcan. There's the trauma of not having a loving relationship with her father, Sarek. There's the jealousy that she has towards her stepbrother, Spock. And then there's the trauma that occurs in the first episode of the first season where she attempts to use Vulcan logic to defeat the incoming Klingon assault by firing first, and in firing first creates a mutiny within her ship and a rift with her surrogate mother, played by Michelle Yeoh, her captain. And the rest of the series is all about recovering from the trauma of the loss of parents, her relationship with Sarek, the tragedy that occurs because of her actions at the beginning of the Klingon War and the loss of Captain Philippa Georgiou's life. And then, of course, confronting the mirror version of that captain. And the arc for season 1 is Burnham's reconnection with the people that she loves, and then the people that she has been struggling to love throughout her life. And if Star Trek Discovery season 2 were to never happen, I feel like the first season concludes, with the exception of one element, that pesky mirror universe version of Philippa Georgiou, of wrapping up all the emotional pain that she has been suffering.
But fabulously, she manages to drum up some all new, all fresh trauma.
Yeah, that's how TV works. And it'll be really interesting to see what happens when she comes face to face with her stepbrother Spock in season 2, and if that opens up old wounds between her and Spock and Sarek and whatnot.
Who's going to play?
Ethan Peck is playing Spock. Ethan Peck is Gregory Peck's grandson.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And he's got a beard, Billy. He's got a beard.
Spock with a beard?
Spock with a beard.
I don't care for it.
He looks sexy and shaggy and delicious, and you'll love him.
Well, we'll see.
No, don't be the internet, Billy. Don't immediately hate on any change to Star Trek continuity.
Like he's literally shitting on an idea of a beard.
Yes. Hair and I have a lot of issues.
You don't know how full that beard is, though.
I think Billy's processing some of his own hair trauma. He's overcoming some trauma right now.
That's accurate. Can that be my number 5?
Anyway, if you're not watching Star Trek Discovery, you're losing out. It's like $6.99 on CBS All Access. Buy a month's worth, watch the entire first season, and then, unsubscribe. Then subscribe back up when season 2 is over with, if you're a cheap bastard. Now, if you're not a cheap bastard and you're like, oh, wait, CBS All Access $6.99, that's like buying a cup of coffee.
True.
No big deal. Just go ahead and do that.
And right now they're doing the short treks, and we learned about
Tilly.
Tilly's dealing with some trauma.
I'm not ready to promote short treks yet.
You
Lisa.
didn't
Is
like
that
that first short trek?
Short treks, yes. They're short episodes about Star Trek, Lisa. Short treks.
They're like if Star Trek was doing its own fan fiction.
I'm not putting the Brad stamp of approval yet on short treks. I like the idea of more Star Trek in my life, but that first short trek was only okay.
Aw, Tilly.
You need to see more.
I need to see more.
He needs a long trek.
I love Tilly. Mary Wiseman, she's amazing.
Yep.
And easily one of my new favorite characters.
Yeah.
But, that short trek was...
I mean, alien-wise, the alien was kind of lame. Okay.
All right, Billy, your number 5.
All right. Well, it seems like we've been hitting some of the classics with Batman and Star Trek. So I'm going to just go and dive in and knock Star Wars off of the list.
Nice.
Specifically, the trauma of Darth Vader. I think a big thing about Star Wars, at least what it ultimately becomes about when you put in all the episodes of it, is the driving character in that series becomes Darth Vader, and his entire motive for being is to avoid the challenges of dealing with trauma. And really not having any coping mechanisms whatsoever other than hate and fear and anger. And I think in its own way, Star Wars explores a lot of those concepts, I think, in a way that are relatable and connectable at more than just an adult level. Like, I think kids can watch those series and see what it's like to be afraid of things and see what that fear can do to you. And I know that Yoda's line kind of gets played for a laugh. And when you look at the original, the 1, 2, 3 episodes, it takes some of the steam out of it. If you're not particularly a fan of it. But, if your experience with them is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like my kids, they watch that and they engage with it. And it's interesting to kind of see them take away different lessons and things from that. So in that way, I don't think there's any, as far as Star Wars go, bigger moment than when Anakin overcomes his affinity to the dark side of the Force to save his son at the end of Return of the Jedi.
You know what the biggest cure of the prequel hate, my own personal prequel hate, is experiencing The Last Jedi hate today.
Yeah.
Like witnessing people just taking a hot steaming dump on The Last Jedi makes me reevaluate my own antagonism toward those prequels.
I'm on the same page, but it's like even you can hear from the way that I talked about it. I'm not done with that opening path yet.
It's a long journey.
Yeah.
All right.
But how do you think history is going to look back at The Last Jedi, say 10, 15 years
I
from
think
now?
they're
It'll be the
going
best.
positively on The Last Jedi.
I hope so.
Less so on still 1, 2, and 3. I
Yeah,
think the
yeah.
greatest gift that 1, 2, and 3 gave us was the Clone Wars and Rebels.
Yeah, Rebels for
And,
sure.
Yeah.
Rebels is amazing.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
All right. My number 5, I'm gonna go with something recent. And it may be an odd choice, but I'll explain. And it is from the most recent iteration of Stephen King's It. It's the Losers Club. And I know like the sequel to this film has not come out yet, but in the second half of this particular story, you know, when there is a time jump into the future and we meet the Losers Club, and they're brought back into this confrontation with this this evil thing. You know, that story is about them overcoming the trauma of what happens in the film that we have now. And I have this on my list because I really enjoyed this particular take on the story. And I remember seeing it in theaters twice at the very least. And I've watched it at least twice since it began streaming on home video. And I don't know. I find the cast of characters, the kids, they're all, you know, their relationship, you know, you buy into it. I'm along for the ride with them, and you know, they all deliver, you know, great performances. And you know, I just the way the movie looked, the way that the score, you know, was put together, I really felt like it was a strong film. And so, you know, because the filmmaking was so good, because all the, you know, the performances were great, and I bought into the relationship and the friendship of those characters and how they organically came together. You know, by the end of that film, and they've only gone through, I mean, by the end of that film, they've gone through some crazy stuff, but that's really only the beginning for them. And when they all go their separate ways, you feel that that friendship breaking apart. You feel the holes that are vacant there, and you feel that it's going to be, they're not going to be in as good a place apart as they were when they are together. Right. And I love the way that movie ends, leading us into this next film. So yeah, and because of what this movie gives us as far as presenting the Losers Club, we want them to overcome, you know the trauma that's you know going to be put upon these kids. And so, you know, yeah, that's why they're number 5 on my list. Brian, you're number 4.
So my number 4 may seem like an obvious pick, but it's definitely a classic pick. This is Sarah Connor, Terminator 2. So yeah, I'll pick Sarah Connor, Linda Hamilton, her performance. I mean, these are movies that are kind of on the forefront of my mind because these are actually movies that I've actually revisited recently. If you guys follow me on Letterboxd, plug at the Turtle Door. I just recently, I think I watched the first Terminator before I left for Fantastic Fest, and when I came back, I watched Terminator 2, and to see the story of Sarah Connor and the trauma that she went through in that first film, and everything that she experienced, not just experiencing like all these deaths and the idea of a Terminator coming from the future to kill her, but how that affected her going into T2 and the performance that Linda Hamilton gives, showing the results of the trauma that she suffered in the first movie and how it has hardened her, how it has made her, quite frankly, one of the most iconic action heroes of our time. But then there's a moment in T2 when she sees the T-1000 for the first time, and it conjures back up that trauma that she felt in the police station in the first film.
So to tie this into Halloween 2018,
okay,
the jump of Sarah Connor at the end of the original Terminator, where she's in the Jeep pregnant and the storm's coming, to the Sarah Connor that we meet in the asylum of Terminator 2. That jump where we see, when we meet Sarah Connor in T2
at that
and
moment,
we recognize all the trauma and pain that she has experienced since the end of the first Terminator, that is very similar to the Laurie Strode that we saw in 1978 to the 2018 Laurie Strode.
Interesting. Okay. So there's a very similar parallel.
Yeah, I think so. And I hadn't really thought about it until you mentioned it just now.
Okay. So you're saying this should have been higher on my list?
No, I'm just saying, like, I don't think I had thought of Laurie Strode and Sarah Connor terminology before.
It's the same.
But you bringing that up, it's like, wow, it's a very similar arc.
I'm interested to see, and I want to see how that plays in Halloween, because knowing this is 40 years later and the character that Laurie Strode is, from what I've seen in the trailers, it does kind of seem like it kind of follows that same arc.
I think Sarah Connor and Laurie Strode would get along pretty well.
Really? Yeah. So that's my number 4 is Sarah Connor.
All right, Wife Dork, you're number 4.
I'm swapping because I was okay. I'm a little peek behind the scenes. I think I'm just swapping my 3 and my 4. Okay, so this is now my number 4.
Yeah.
And the movie is True Grit.
Oh,
I'm going with the 2010 Coen Brothers film.
Yeah, because the other one
is garbage. So Maddie Ross's father was murdered by Tom Chaney, and she's just a child, but she's the type. She's smart for her age. She has and she has a ton of will, and she takes it upon herself to avenge her father through the law and by hiring bounty hunters. And by the way of Rooster Cogburn, our favorite Jeff Bridges, and then later LaBeef, Texas Ranger Matt Damon. What I like about this film is Haley Steinfeld's performance, where you could tell that, she really presented this buttoned up character. And you can tell she has a tremendous sense of adventure and a moral attitude about how she thinks the death of her father should be handled. But underneath that is there's a true sorrow for the loss of her family member. And so, like, her way of overcoming her trauma is to take matters into her own hands, despite being a 14-year-old girl in the old West.
In the old West.
Yes. My number 4. Right. And I'm glad that's my number 4 because I really was not good at talking about it, and I can build up to being a little more eloquent.
It's a good pick, Lisa.
Thank you.
I've been aching to rewatch that film.
I know. We have like a badass True Grit Mondo poster that hangs over our couch.
It's gorgeous.
It's a great score by Carter Burwell too. Love that score.
All right, B, your number 4.
My number 4 is it's interesting that Brian picked Sarah Connor, because I'm going with another classic 80s heroine that had a 90s reinvention of a sort, and that's Ellen Ripley, as seen in Alien 3.
Okay, I was waiting for Ellen Ripley to come up.
So here is a haunted character, right? 1979, Ridley Scott's Alien. She goes through the hell of the xenomorph, rampaging through the Nostromo, picking off her crew one by one. She survives it. James Cameron resurrects her years later through cryosleep. The Space Marines come and they rescue out of her slumber. And she's now lost not only her crew, but because of timey-wimey shenanigans, she's lost her family. And her new family happens to be these Space Marines, and in particular, this lost child that they find on the LV-426. Poor Newt. And, Newt and Ripley have this mother-daughter bond, It's the emotional core of Aliens. And then comes David Fincher. They've survived the horrors of LV-426 only to die in their slumber. Hicks, Bishop, and poor Newt robbed of life just as they had been rescued. And there's Ellen Ripley holding the bag and the emotional torture within. They're on this prison planet filled with rapists and murderers and the scum of the earth.
Yeah.
And she is this victim who cannot escape this curse of the xenomorph. And the xenomorph has followed her onto this planet. There is a face hugger, jumps on a dog, really gnarly birth sequence. And now here she is once again having to fend for her life and the life of others, this nightmarish demonic creature. And she's at an all-time low. And the ending of Alien 3 is not one of triumph in a happy way. She's implanted with an egg, and her last gift is going down in flames with that creature in her chest, and also the final creature that she brought to this planet. She survives. Even she ends her life on her terms. You know, she's not given much of a choice. She's given a cancer in her body, but theoretically she's able to end the pain of others at the end of this film. Now, of course, there's a resurrection of sorts in the fourth movie. And if we're talking alien films, I like to think of resurrection as episode 1. Not my favorite. Interesting, unique. They could have done some really dramatic stuff with her character as a clone in Resurrection, but I feel like that film falls way short. And Alien 3 gets a lot of grief. It's not the follow-up that a lot of fans wanted after the exhilarating ride that was Aliens, but emotionally, I feel deeply for Ripley in Fincher's version.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Billy, your number 4.
All right. I think kind of riffing on Brad's discussion about Ellen Ripley sort of having to face her demise and think about how she wants to live her life and exit on her terms, I would like to go to a more recent horror film, It Follows, by David Robert Mitchell. Maika Monroe plays Jay. She goes out on a date with her boyfriend. They have sex for the first time, and then he drugs her and ties her to a chair in a parking garage. So not your best first date. But the conceit of the movie is that sort of this monster becomes a sexually transmitted disease. I mean, that's kind of the thing that it goes through, is now that she's had sex with him, this monster will chase her instead, and she can pass this curse on or not as she sees fit. But I think a lot of what the movie winds up talking about is, and maybe not exactly, so maybe it's stretched. I'm not so sure. I'm thinking over my thoughts in my head as I go.
That's called It Modcast.
That happens. It happens live on the air. That's okay. My note just said It Follows. So, but no, I think kind of what the movie winds up talking a lot about is inevitably we have to deal with the fact that our time here is limited, and the trauma of things that follow us around us as we go and down our paths, however limited or long it may be. We have to carry these things with us. And I think the turning point of that movie is not just kind of, when they try and overcome the monster, because, they put plans together and it doesn't work for them. It's her finding a partnership that she can believe in and sort of accepting the inevitability of it and trying to find a way to live her life regardless of that. And I think that's a key part of overcoming trauma, is accepting the fact that you are not formally a person who has dealt with trauma. You are always a person who deals with trauma, and you have to find a way to live your life with that. And so in that way, I think kind of it fits in the theme of this.
Okay. All right. Great pick. My number 4 is going to be Casey Cook from Split.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, you heard.
Oh, man.
You heard that.
What happened? Sorry.
Snooze, you lose, Brian.
I know.
So yeah, Casey Cook and M. Night Shyamalan's Split in the film. Anya Taylor-Joy plays Casey Cook. Casey Cook is one of 3 teenagers who's kidnapped by James McAvoy's Dennis / Patricia / Hedwig / The Beast / Kevin Whittlecrumb / Barry / Orwell / Jade. There's like 23 personalities in this dude. So he slashed all those people. So anyway, the movie is about how these young ladies are going to get themselves out of this particular situation. Maybe be about more than that. But I don't want to spoil it for you if you haven't seen this film. Needless, I would just say this, man, and I don't even have to. 9 times out of 10, when this movie comes up, at the very least on ItMod, it's about the ending. But I'm not even going to talk about the ending. I just want to say that the movie stands on its own as a great thriller. There is the cast is phenomenal. M. Night Shyamalan is, he's back in form. He's crafting a very tight and a tautly paced thriller, and he's giving us just enough to keep us on the edge of our seats. And then when the movie is supposed to hit its emotional beats or those thriller moments, it does so appropriately, and the audience reacts appropriately. And I don't know, it's just a great time at the movies, and the fact that it ties into some other things is just the icing on the cake. And that Anya Taylor-Joy's character of Casey, I really find it fascinating, and I love what M. Night Shyamalan does with that character's past trauma and how that informs her character's decision making in the present, and how she ultimately overcomes her current trauma because of trauma from her past. And so I found that empowering, how that's integrated into that character, and how integral it is to that character. So yeah, that's got to be my number 4. Brian, your number 3.
Well, just to let the listeners know, that was going to be my number 1.
Oh no!
It can still be.
Kid.
It can still be.
No.
it can't.
I just want to let the listeners know how low it is on your list and where it should be.
Oh, okay. Well, when you
man,
hear my
Brian
number
just
1,
bounced
Brian,
right back from that
when you
trauma.
hear my number 1, Brian, we'll talk about
did.
that. Okay. All right. What's your number 3?
So my number 3, it's funny that we're talking about a lot of these people, because I think you can use any final girl in any horror movie as someone kind of getting over.
Shh.
No.
Shh. Don't jump. Don't step on mine.
Oh, hopefully I won't. I won't believe I will. No, I'm choosing Sidney Prescott.
Motherfucker.
Damn, I did.
You did.
I can change it. I have a list.
No, don't
don't
change it. Stick to your
Okay.
guns.
Well, I hope I can live up to what Brad. What number was this going to be for you?
My next one.
It
My
was.
next one, yeah.
Well, I mean,
Well,
let's talk
That's
about
too
it.
low for both of you then.
Oh, damn. No, but Sidney Prescott. I'm saying this because, again, letterbox plug. I just recently watched the whole trilogy of these films, Scream, Scream 2, and Scream 3. And the story of Sidney Prescott as a survivor, and then also the trauma that she goes through of having to suffer the sins of her mother, is an interesting story that's kind of played out through all 3 of these films. And we see that, and these movies are over 20 years old, so I will spoil it, that with the mysterious character of Ghostface and who the killers are in each one of these movies, it's not only like this whodunit type of story, but whoever the killer is in these movies plays a bigger theme and a bigger arc in Sidney Prescott's story, and who her mother was before she was born, and her having to pay the price for the stuff that her mother went through and the trauma that she suffers from that. And with her boyfriend Billy and Stu being the killers in the first one, and then the fact that who Sidney Prescott's mother was as causing Billy's mother to leave, which gave him his own trauma. And then you move into the second movie where that trauma continues, where you come to find out it's still related, where Billy's mother is now the killer. But what's interesting was Scream 3. Now, I thought the movie was kind of, I think about that movie now and seeing where Sidney Prescott was now being like a suicide prevention. She calls over the phone to prevent people with suicidal tendencies and to help battered women and women in trouble. So to see where she is at the beginning of Scream 3, I think is an interesting place to kind of set her, because now it's like she's taking her own trauma and the fact that she's survived from that, and now using that to try to help other women as well through whatever trauma that they're also going through. So I don't know. I like her arc. I like that trilogy as a horror trilogy and what that means to the overall story of Sidney Prescott. And yeah, that's my number 3, Sidney Prescott.
It's a good pick.
All right, Wife Dork, what do you got? Number 3.
So my number 3 is the movie Memento.
Yes.
And I mean, it's been a while since I've thought about this movie.
God damn, Lisa, that's a great pick.
He suffers from anterograde amnesia as a result of seeing his wife raped and murdered, and so and then suffering a blow to the head, and so following that trauma, he uses his skills as an insurance investigator to investigate certain, he believes there was a second attacker by the name of Johnny G. And so he's trying he lacks the ability to make new memories. And so the way he keeps track of all of these details is he has an intricate series of notes, Polaroids, and what I find iconic about the film, the tattoos all over Guy Pearce's beautiful bod. And
quite the canvas.
Nobody's complaining. So we follow this guy trying to put together these clues that he's left for himself. And of course, turns out, who can you really trust? It's like one of those situations where, he's lying to himself and others are lying to him and blah, blah, blah. But what really made this movie such a phenomenon in the 2000s was the play with the chronology of this film. So it has 2 timelines, and this movie did this trick in such a way that it literally can never be done again, because it's now just the Memento thing. Oh, it's telling the story backwards. So it had 2 timelines, and one timeline was in color. Which was the one that was moving backwards, I think. And then the black and white one was moving forwards.
Correct.
Or maybe it's
correct. Nope, you're correct.
Okay, I'm good. Yeah. So it was this idea of, and I ended up seeing it in college because I saw everything late. And it blew my goddamn mind.
Yes.
Especially a college kid who's barely seen any movies. I'm like, wow, movies are amazing.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I wish I had anterograde amnesia so I could just watch that movie again right after watching it in an infinite loop and forever looking at Guy Pearce.
Because you don't remember seeing it. So
exactly. I do kind of feel that I do have that, though, when it comes to movies. I tend to just remember how I felt, and I just have my cryptic notes. And then I have to put it back together again through letterbox scores. What did I think of that movie? But I do have a legit memory of me really enjoying this film, and I think it's time for a rewatch. This is bizarre. This is like two Christopher Nolan mentions in a fistful of Lisa Gullickson. Who am I, Brian? What's going on?
Wow. All right. So great pick, Lisa. This would have been on my number one. Have I?
Where I really want to be.
Yeah.
Brian.
All
I want to be
right.
Brian.
Brad, your number 3.
So this was my 2, but now I gotta like readjust taste, Brian. But I'm going with The Color Purple and the character of
my gosh.
Johnson, played by Whoopi Goldberg. Talk about a character who has suffered endless amounts of trauma. The film opens up with her giving birth to her second child, fathered by her father, and also taken away by her father, and thrown into the mystery of the world. She has no idea where her children have been ripped from her body and placed. And her father also basically sells her to a friend, Albert, played by Danny Glover. And Albert, of course, immediately starts abusing her upon their marriage. And her sister Nettie wants to come and reunite with her, is taken in by Albert because Albert is also attracted to her sister. And this is just a story of a woman who is constantly besieged by others and has every right to give up on life, but continues and strives because she knows there is a piece of her still out there in the world. And that question mark of who are her children, where are her children, drives her and keeps her going, and her bond with her sister Nettie as well.
Yeah,
it is such a crushing, painful movie, but it is one that delivers inspiration through sheer survival.
Yeah.
And this was a Darren homework assignment to Brad once upon a time. It was a movie that, like, when I first watched it, I was hung up on my feelings about Steven Spielberg's direction of the film. And my conversation at that point was really about, was this guy the right guy to handle this material? And that question and that conversation has really faded from my mind. But I am stuck with Whoopi Goldberg's performance and her story, her character's journey. That I think about a lot.
Yeah. All right, man. That's a goddamn, Brad. That's a phenomenal pick. That should be on my list next to friggin' Memento. All right, Billy. Your number 3 that should also be on my list.
I knew that he would appreciate me adding that to his list.
Shit.
So thank you, Darren, for making me watch that movie.
You're welcome, man. You're welcome. All right, Billy, what do you got? Number 3.
All right, so I think sometimes the act of overcoming trauma obviously can define the course of your life. And I think that sometimes in overcoming trauma, we can find our own passions and the things that drive us and the way to help others overcome similar things. And so my pick is Twister with Helen Hunt as Dr. Joe Harding.
I actually like that.
So
I don't remember anything about Twister.
What? Brad, you're nuts.
So Dr. Joe Harding.
She goes through some trauma.
Yeah, she goes through trauma.
Is this the one with Devon Sawa, or was it the other one? Was the one with Devon Sawa?
The other one. I don't think Devon Sawa's
two.
in
I'm
Twister.
gonna figure out which tornado he's in.
So let's not talk about Devon Sawa. We know you were.
I would like to get a fistful of Devon Sawa.
Well, sure. Okay, so Dr. Joe Harding, before she was Dr. Joe Harding, was just Joe Harding. And, the way that they kind of revealed Dr. Joe Harding's past in Twister is it's a conversation where they're talking about the biggest storms that they ever chased. And they sort of casually ask around this table, has anybody seen ever an EF5 tornado?
Yeah.
And the answer is, well, only one of us. And they point to Joe Harding. And then that's when you find out that as a child, she had her house destroyed by a tornado along with the rest of her community. And so, the conversation, like, she has a really great monologue in the movie that talks about, like, like you don't know what it's like to, watch one house get spared and one get destroyed.
Yeah, to feel like it was targeting her.
Right.
Yeah.
And so she takes that fear and that trauma and that inability to control the things around her, and she turns it into science, and she turns it into her career, and she turns it into the thing in which she is most passionate. And I think that's a key part of overcoming trauma.
Absolutely, that opening sequence, because I think even at the beginning of the movie,
you do get to see, I think at the opening,
you don't know that that's her. You just think that that's a scene to establish what the tornado is.
Right.
But then when you tie it in, and that I think it's that one scene where they're chasing the one hurricane in the rain, and the device, I forget what they call it.
It's something.
Gets destroyed, and she's trying to pick up the sensors to it.
Right.
And Bill Paxton is saying it's like, you got to let it go, and that's what she says. You never seen it miss this house and miss that house, and then you know that she was the girl in the beginning, and the fact that her father was taken from her by the storm is really what drives her.
Well, and I think that's what makes her character very interesting in the movie, because even having overcome a lot of that, she is still extremely focused and driven to an unhealthy extent, and to the cost of her own safety in order to do this. And that relationship with Bill Paxton helps help her find a medium where they can solve problems without her throwing herself literally into the maw of a giant tornado.
I think we have to ring a bell, because I do not think Twister has ever come up once in conversation on this podcast since its existence.
It's a good movie.
I know. I really like that movie.
We've talked about it before. I've championed Twister. Yeah.
I don't feel like a single human has talked about it before since today.
Wow.
Can we focus, people?
Yeah.
It was Night of the Twisters that Devin show was in. It was a TV. It was a TV
that
movie.
Sure as shit has never been mentioned on this podcast.
It came out the same year, 1996. That was
Asylum was making movies back then?
That was a big year for Twisting Wind.
Okay.
All right.
It also stars John Schneider.
Okay.
Lisa,
shh.
who is
oh geez.
who's also in Dukes of Hazzard. He played Bo.
I need to watch Twister again. I have not seen it since
great.
the theater.
Okay.
Jan de Bont, man.
Yeah, Jan
That's
de
good
Bont.
shit.
Uh-huh.
I have not.
No, but that was his last gasp. After he had Speed and he had
Speed
Twister.
and Twister are the only two movies that Jan de Bont directed, right?
The Haunting.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay.
It was director Timothy Bond who did Night of the Twisters.
Lisa,
I
stop
have
it.
seen it more than once.
All right.
I don't know.
My number 3 is gonna be let's see. It's gonna be Muna Otaru as Mad from Daniel Barber's The Keeping Room.
Nice. That's a good fucking pick.
Yeah, that's good.
This pick specifically is in regards to the one scene between her character and Haley Steinfeld's character. Speaking of Haley Steinfeld and True Grit, I keep forgetting that she's in this movie, and she's great in this movie.
Yeah.
Just her character arc and how it sort of culminates in this moment. I'm pretty sure this has been on a fistful of mine before this movie, and maybe this scene. But this scene is where Mad talks about. She talks about, her monster being dead, and because in the previous scene, Haley Steinfeld's character Louise, there's an attack on her, so there's an attempted sexual assault, and Mad kills the perpetrator, and Mad tries to calm her by letting her know that in your world, the thing that you fear, that tried to hurt you, it's dead. You take solace in knowing that it was a gruesome act, yes, but he's dead, so you know that your monster is dead, whereas mine. And she goes into that story about her past, and it's fucking heartbreaking. It is soul crushing, and it's half of it is the writing. Julia Hart, wrote the story, so half of it is the power of her writing, but the other half is Munu Otaro bringing the sorrow and the tragedy of Mad's past to life, and it just, oh man, it floors me every single time I watch that scene. So good. But yeah, that has to be on my list for talking about a fistful of overcoming trauma, because to see Mad be able to, she's in a position where she can help other people because she overcame her trauma, and so yeah, that's got to be on my list. So Brian, your number 2.
Yeah. Okay, so my number 2, it's funny, before we started recording, we were talking about Quentin Tarantino, and we talked a lot about his whole filmography. And if you look back, there are a lot of characters throughout his films that have suffered through a lot of trauma. And Brad jokingly was saying that, why don't you just pick Old Faithful, Kill Bill?
Yeah.
And you know what? I am going to pick Kill
Look at you. Of course you are.
You're welcome.
There's a caveat to that. I'm not picking Beatrix Kiddo.
Ooh.
I am picking a sequence from Kill Bill Volume 1, which is Oren Ishii, played by Lucy Liu, the anime sequence, and her story, overcoming the trauma of being under the bed and witnessing the death of her father. Oof. And then how that affects her, and how she grows up to become an assassin, to come back to that same guy that killed her father, and ultimately get revenge for the man that killed her father. But that anime sequence, which I thought was brilliantly done, and to put that in the middle of a film, I thought was daring on Tarantino's part, but it also shows how much he appreciates that genre of filmmaking and that style, and then just that art of not just animation but animation. And to tell Oren Ishii's backstory and the way that he was able to do it within that chapter, with Beatrix having to wait to get her big toe to move. So in the meantime, we get this story of Oren Ishii, and if you think about the characters in that movie, even though Oren Ishii and the other Deadly Viper Venoms are antagonists, villains to Beatrix Kiddo, you can sympathize with their stories. And I think you can definitely sympathize with Oren Ishii and who that character was, even though you are rooting against her in the final act in the House of Blue Leaves. I just thought it was amazing just to kind of see that and see it told in that way. So yeah, that's my number 2 for overcoming trauma, Oren Ishii.
All right, motherfucker. Wife Dork, what is your number 2?
My number 2 is a movie that kind of brings to light a common trauma that I feel like society tends to forget about. And so this is a double bill of let's see. I'm so sorry.
A double bill of trauma?
No, it's not a double bill of trauma, but it is 2 people overcoming trauma together, and that is Carl and Russell in Up. So Carl, at the beginning of the film, like, we all had to overcome the trauma of seeing the opening of that movie, the story of Carl and Ellie meeting as children, who both have a yen for adventure, and then having to, and falling in love and getting married, and then they have a miscarriage and they discover they can't have kids, but they still, look forward to a life of adventure together, and, they are scrimping and saving to be able to.
Why are you making me relive this trauma, Lisa?
And then, she gets sick and she passes away, and
we all cried
and we all cried in the theater, and we all had to get over seeing our neighbors cry and how gross everybody looks when they cry. But but after that, and that, like, they lived a long life together. They had the privilege of living to old age with someone they love, but then, Carl is left alone and he withdraws from society, and and he no longer feels the motivation to travel and do those things that made them, but also made him. Yeah. And so his neighborhood is changing, and they're trying to kick him out of the neighborhood and move him into a retirement home. And he decides, no, I'm going to finally go live this adventure. And he, then we get the iconic house with the balloons, but he has a stowaway, which is Russell. Yeah. And through his travels with Russell, he rediscovers his love for travel, and it allows him to look back on his wife's their marriage together without that overwhelming sadness. He can finally look back and see the thing and celebrate what they had together, and go on to live the rest of his life. Yeah. And it's a beautiful fucking story. If there's anything that Pixar gets right, it's just the emotionality of things, and getting big life things down to their essence, to where they can be delivered to children. And I think the idea of presenting this story of, it is traumatic to become old. You live your whole life working towards something and building your wealth and building your legacy or whatever your life's work is, building a beautiful relationship with your wife. And then there's just a denouement at the end where it's like, oh, it's not about growth anymore. It's about, and it's, I can imagine that because, it's extraordinarily lonely and hard, and you need that human connection to enjoy your elder years. Yeah. So I really appreciate the fact that this story is being packaged for children.
Yeah. All right.
That's my next.
Brad, your number 2?
For my number 2, I am going back to another classic ItMod homework episode that I gave Darren this time. Yeah. The 1953 film noir, The Big Heat.
Oh, yeah.
Movie that starts off rather traditionally. Glenn Ford is a police officer who's called in to investigate the suicide of another cop, and, things are not what they appear to be. Yeah. Okay, sure. And in his investigation, 2 things happen at the midway point of the film. One, his wife is murdered when his car explodes. A bomb is placed in his car, thinking that, and it's some gangsters thinking they're going to kill Glenn Ford, but they kill his wife instead. And then the second one is that the character that Gloria Graham is playing, Debbie Marsh, she's your basic gangster's moll. She's the arm candy to Lee Marvin's monstrous Vic Stone. And he in a heated moment of anger, throws a pot of coffee in her face.
Asshole.
Yeah, big time. And scars her tremendously. And Gloria Graham, that going forward, this character that you dismissed as a ditz, as a gold digger, you discover through witnessing her pain, and that allows her to unleash her anger and her frustration at her station in life and how she got to be on the arm of Vic Stone. She decides she's had enough, and she's going to cross lines and team up with Glenn Ford's Banyan and take down this gangster asshole boyfriend of hers. And she becomes this avenger. And even within the context of film noir and femme fatales, Marsh, as played by Gloria Graham, is an incredibly unique character and stands out amongst all of those figures that you see populating the AFI Top 100 or what have you. The Big Heat is a respected noir, but I don't think it gets the credit that it deserves, and in particular through the agency of Debbie Marsh, as played by Gloria Graham. She's such a badass by the end of the movie.
Yep.
And you cannot believe how you were disappointed and how dismissive you were as an audience member to this Maul character when the film starts. And it makes rewatches of The Big Heat tremendously satisfying.
Great pick, B. All right, Billy, your number 2.
All right, so my number 2, I think, is the fact that, we don't all overcome trauma the same way. And sometimes we overcome trauma in unhealthy ways. So my number 2 pick is Psycho and Norman Bates. Because, I mean, like, his classic line, we all go a little mad sometimes. I'm just looking at pictures on my IMDb of the actors. Anthony Perkins and Janet Leigh. And, his relationship with Janet Leigh when she comes to the hotel and the way that he deals with the trauma of experiencing life with his mother. And his own issues is to murder people. And
it's not a choice. He's broken.
Yeah, he is broken. Like I
it's
think
a schism.
Yes. Like it's like trauma has broken him.
Yeah.
But that's the way that plays out for him as he tries to process it and deal with it.
Yeah.
By leering and murdering
and becoming his mom.
Sure. Look. Like I said, grief makes people process things in weird ways.
Have you seen Psycho 2?
No, I haven't seen Psycho 2.
I'm giving you Psycho 2 Blu-ray before you leave the Dork Cave. That is a painful exploration of Norman Bates' trauma.
The first time I saw Psycho wasn't until just recently. I saw it at the Alamo Drafthouse.
That's right. I remember that.
And that was I mean, it's weird to see a movie that's in the cultural zeitgeist where you know a lot of the beats of it, but I didn't know all the beats. I knew the major ones.
You know what you don't know the beats of? Psycho 2. And here's the thing: Psycho 2, great movie.
None of the words that you said before that.
No, it's not Hitchcock. It's not a Hitchcock film.
No, yeah.
It's very much an 80s movie, but it takes the character of Norman Bates very seriously, and Anthony Perkins rocks that movie.
Okay.
Psycho 3 is actually also pretty good.
I feel like the Psycho movies overall, like I should see that, and I should probably watch the series because no, miss, ooh, hard pass.
Good actors. Psycho 1 is a masterpiece, obviously.
Yeah.
But don't dismiss Psycho 2.
I am not dismissing it.
I'm just saying.
I just haven't seen it.
Don't dismiss Psycho 2. Psycho 2 is fucking rad.
All right. Great pick. My number 2. So the other picks on my list are about how characters in a movie overcame trauma. But for my number 2 pick, it's really about how a country chose to overcome trauma. And that is through Ishiro Honda's 1954 Godzilla. And it's that Ichiro Honda chose to do Godzilla and use that as that country's way of dealing with the trauma of nuclear warfare and the horrors that that country faced because of it. And it's always an interesting thing when art becomes an expression of a people, and there's so many different ways someone could express anger, fear, remorse, and I find it infinitely fascinating that out of that particular and specific horror of those people in that period of time, that my favorite cinematic movie monster was birthed and created. And Godzilla is my favorite cinematic movie monster. I've said it on the podcast before. I'm like, I have a really personal, close affinity to that character as it relates to my childhood and where I was as a kid at that time and the things that I was going through, and it's just so crazy to me that this character who has one of the longest running film franchises of all time was birthed through a country's means of trying to find some catharsis, trying to find some type of way to overcome this particular trauma. And the amount of movies that have come out, toys, merchandise, video games, the fandom of that creature, it's insane to me that, again, he was birthed from a country's need to overcome a tragedy. And yeah, so that's got to be number 2 on my list. Brian, your number 1.
So for my number 1, and I do fear that I'm going to take somebody's pick.
Yeah, take mine.
Okay.
Don't worry.
Lisa talked about Batman, Bruce Wayne.
Yeah. She already picked Batman.
Yeah. I'm leading up.
Batman and Robin.
Close. No, but comic book characters, I think, are also a good source to kind of show certain characters that suffer through trauma. And I want to pick a comic book character in the movie universe right now, Tony Stark, going through trauma. And this is throughout the whole MCU. And you can start with taking the missile into space in Avengers and how that plays into Iron Man 3 with his PTSD and dealing with that and having to overcome that with almost dying in Avengers. So I think just even that part of the MCU dealing with Avengers and Iron Man 3. And then once he kind of, at the end of Iron Man 3, he gets the chest plate removed, he gets himself fixed. But then we move into Age of Ultron and the reason why he's building this, Ultron to kind of police the world. And I forget the phrase he says in Age of Ultron, what he refers it to. I guess build a shield of armor around the world, because I think that is coming from the trauma that he has dealt with in the previous films as well. And then when you look at the betrayal of Captain Steve Rogers in Civil War, where he finds out who was really responsible for killing his parents, and then just dealing with the death of his parents, but then finding out that somebody that you have fought side by side with knew this the whole time, and that secret, and how that affects Tony, and how that leads into Infinity War, and everything with Thanos. Even you've heard him say to Doctor Strange, like, Thanos has been living in my head for the last 6 years. This is something that Tony has been dealing with throughout the entire MCU, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in Avengers 4, how that trauma comes full circle, how he's able to kind of relieve himself or get over this trauma, or if he ever does,
or succumb to it,
and I find that intriguing. And Tony Stark is a character that, as we get further and further in the MCU, just completely just amazes me as far as his arc in these series of films. If you go by just the first movie, even though he has a very nuanced and complex performance that you're really able to kind of really connect with him. He does come off as a bit of a douchebag, but when you see him throughout these course of films and everything that he has been fighting against and trying to get over, it's remarkable to see where his character has come. And it's interesting too. I remember when we went to go see Infinity War for the first time, and Darren, your brothers were there, and I remember Mike saying something that has stayed with me to this day, where when he got stabbed by Thanos, everybody was saying, "Oh, this is the moment he's going to die." And I remember Mike saying, like, Tony Stark wants to die. And that stayed with me. And part of me believes that. Part of me feels like he is hurting so much, or that he feels like he's going through so much pain that he's ready to die. And I find that interesting going into Avengers 4, to see if that's something that he is actually going to succumb to. So I don't know, man. I find his arc and his trauma and how he deals with his trauma throughout the whole MCU very, very fascinating.
Yeah.
like from the beginning where he says, you know, you're not, Captain America says, you're not the guy to lay himself down on the wire and let people go over.
Yeah.
And his resistance to that, and then like his very defective embrace of that, almost psychologically speaking, because I want to like if that happens in the course of service, great.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. That's interesting. I like that take.
And he's proven it in each subsequent film, even in that film in Avengers, where he says, you know, he's like, yeah, you're not the guy to lay on the wire. He's like, yeah, I'm the guy who will cut the wire.
Right.
But at the end of Avengers, he's the one who's sacrificing himself to save the world. So it's interesting to see that.
The representation of his trauma, though, like this was which Iron Man had the kid? Was that 2? 3.
Yeah.
Like there were certain scenes of panic attacks where I was just like, that's not what panic attacks are like. Like, oh, it's coming on.
Yeah.
You made it happen. My panic attack. Now I have to stick my hands in snow like you always do.
It's a movie, Lisa.
It's a movie, but at the same time, that's like where it's just goes back to the narrative. Like, if you're going to represent PTSD, or you're going to represent, like, I don't have PTSD, I have anxiety, you're going to represent like what a panic attack is like. Well, they're kind of different from everybody, but there's definitely ways that they're not. And like that scene always has bothered me.
Yeah.
All right. So whose go is it?
It's my turn.
Lisa,
It's my
you're
turn.
number 2.
This is my number 1. Yeah. Stay focused, Darren. I know
Sorry.
you're not in the room. You don't have our stimulating personalities
know,
to
right?
keep you awake. Okay. My number 1 is like how the brain deals amidst trauma, I guess, and that's Pan's Labyrinth. Ophelia and Pan's Labyrinth. So this is Guillermo del Toro's Spanish film. Where to start with this? So it takes place during Francoist Spain, and she is helpless. She's a child, a young child, and her mother is very sick, and her stepfather is a phalangist. So it's his job to go house to house and execute those he believes are rebels against the new regime. So her mother is dying, and her brother is actually one of the rebels, and she's a child, and she's just trying to make sense of the situation and also feel useful and feel helpful. And so she escapes to this realm of fairy tale where she meets a faun at the mouth of fairies lead her to a labyrinth where if she completes these tasks, and they're very fanciful tasks of, retrieve this particular root, or take a dagger from a child eater's hand, or, these very fanciful tasks, then she can be the hero of her own story. And these two plot lines in the story run parallel to the horrors in her real life and the very scary events in her fanciful life. And in the Guillermo del Toro magical fashion, reality and fiction and fairy tale blend together in one of the most devastating endings to a film ever. I legit cried 15 minutes after this film ended. It was astoundingly beautiful and never watched again.
Where do you fall on Pan's Labyrinth as far as the fantasy elements are concerned? Are the fantasy elements legit, or are they just figments?
Guillermo del Toro speaks of the story as being a fable, or being a fairy tale. But I do think that there is something inherently escapist about it.
But I'm straight up asking you as a viewer at the end of the movie when she is shot and dies and the film ends with her waking up in the fairy tale land. Do you believe
that she's in a fairy tale land? No, I do not.
You think she's dead?
I think that she's dead, and I think that the fairy tale is a continuation of the how she would in retrospect see her own death. You know what I mean? Like, to me, I just think that is just the continuation of her own imaginary story, but I think that reality is reality.
How about you fellas? How do you see the end of Pan's Labyrinth?
Honestly, I saw Pan's Labyrinth in the movie. Actually, me and Darren saw it in the theater together. Yeah, but I think that's the only time I've seen it, and I cannot remember the film.
So you don't even have an answer?
I'm sorry, Brad. I can't really
How about you,
say.
Darren? Do you have a feeling on that?
Yeah, what Lisa said. Like, I think that ending is just for us. Like, her, like, she's gone. And that's how she would view her own ending. But I think I think the rest of the movie and the fact that she even dies makes me feel like that movie is leaning heavily towards the reality, the tragic reality that she actually did pass away, and there's no fantasy realm that she's gone to.
And Billy?
Well, I never choose the fairy tale, but my return question would be, do you think at the end of Kumiko Treasure Hunter,
I was about to bring up
is
Kumiko.
I also think Kumiko's dead.
She's dead.
She's dead. She's even more dead.
She's more dead than Ophelia.
In my defense, I think whenever any movie is over, that all of the children are dead. The Goonies are dead.
Oh, man.
All of the Lost Boys are dead.
Damn.
What are other movies? The movie Annie. As soon as they're done dancing, credits. All of those kids are dead.
No.
All right.
It's a hard knock life.
Whenever a film ends, I assume anybody under 18 is deceased.
Oh.
All right.
There's some trauma maybe we should explore at some point.
Should I lay down on the couch?
All right. Brad?
For my number one, I'm going to stay happy. I'm going to stay happy. And I'm going to pick 1976's Carrie. Just directed by Brian De Palma.
All of those kids are dead.
Lisa and I just watched this. I was going to say we rewatched it. I rewatched it. I showed Lisa it for the first time. She had never seen it before. Yeah. And, high school, that's trauma, right? But for Carrie White, it's more traumatic than most, thanks to her upbringing by her insane religious zealot mother who has guarded her and shielded her from the realities of this world through the lens of religion. And when Carrie has her period over the opening credits of this movie and all her classmates mock her and her terror, like Sissy Spacek, when she discovers her period, and she is, I don't know if there is a better representation of terror on a human face than Sissy Spacek in the showers of Carrie in the opening sequence. Yeah. She is destroyed, and those kids are just throwing tampons at her and screaming, "Plug it up, plug it up, plug it up." And then the film just goes south from there.
Yeah.
Now, the magical elements of Carrie is that she's hit puberty and also discovering the ability to move things with her mind. And as these teenage monsters assault her and dump her with blood, pig's blood, fucking John Travolta and Nancy Allen. What?
John Travolta looks 40 years old in that film.
Yeah. John never looked younger than 40. She lashes out with her telekinesis and she burns that fucking school to the ground.
Like you do.
And anybody who has even tasted an inkling of Carrie White's high school trauma in their own existence is like, burn, mother, burn. And she's finally able to lash out at her mom and what she's done in her life. And she's able to burn down her house and kill her mom. And of course, she dies in the fire. And so, like, it's not necessarily overcoming trauma in a life extending way.
Sure.
But that outburst that she's finally able to express herself and express her anger and frustration and pain in a physical way to the outside world. There is it elicits a hurrah from the audience, even though while we're cheering, we know it's only going to end in misery.
Yeah.
Pun intended, Stephen King.
All right. Great pick. All right, Billy, your number one.
All right. So I don't know that this is an upbeat to end on for me. But
Keep it down. We're Pan's Labyrinth Carry to whatever hell you're going to talk about.
Mass child murder. I'm going to bring it down from that. No, so my number one pick is Buster Small Heart by Sarah Dina Smith. I'm a big fan of that movie. But I think as it specifically relates to the discussion of trauma and trying to overcome trauma, I think it deals very well with the fracturing nature of trauma. So we talked about that a little bit with Psycho and Norman Bates' experience with that and being broken by that. In this movie, Rami Malek's character, Jonah, as he is before his moment of tragedy, and Buster, as he is after his moment of tragedy, is literally fractured into different people by a terrible event that happens in his life. He's experiencing immense amounts of stress trying to provide for his new family and working a job that he that doesn't afford him the ability to provide for his family in any meaningful way. He has to live with his wife's parents, and he has to deal with his internal shame at not being able to do what he needs to do. At a point in the movie, I don't really want to give the movie away, because if you haven't seen Buster Small Heart, I mean, get some tissues and like prepare yourself for an experience, but you should watch it. You can't. I'll react.
You don't see Brad's gestures.
Whenever we burst out laughing, just know that somebody is pantomiming a wank.
I don't have the ability to hold that in. You guys are good at that. I'm terrible at it.
Are we?
Well, I mean, Brad's not good at holding it in.
All right.
No, so I think that there's a lot going on in that movie as far as the discussion of trauma. I am particularly a fan of Sarah Dina Smith's writing, and I think that the concept of the movie is interesting, and I don't think it's necessarily for everybody, but I do very much connect with it as a discussion of trauma.
And to plug, we talked to Sarah Dina Smith on this podcast, and you should go back in our feed and listen to that rad interview.
She's my favorite fucking person. Just she talked about Sarah Dina Smith is crazy, and in like the best fucking way as far as I'm concerned. So listen to that conversation. It's awesome.
All right. My number one. So this one, like the other picks on my list and on everyone else's list for the most part, have in the films that they're in, the person having the trauma and then overcoming the trauma at the very end, and we get to see that, and we get our catharsis, and then we see the film subject or the character overcoming their odds. But my number one film, The Look of Silence, doesn't really have the character. You don't see the main character necessarily overcoming the trauma. The documentary is just his attempt to overcome the trauma of his brother's death. And I'm reading this story from this storyline from IMDb. An Indonesian man with a communist background named Ramil was brutally murdered when the communist purge occurred in 1965. His remaining family members lived in fear and silence until making of this documentary. Adi, a brother of his, decided to revisit the horrific incident and visited the men who were responsible for the killings and one survivor of the purge. These meetings uncovered sadistic details of the murders and exposed raw emotions and reactions of the killer's family members about what happened in the past, much to Adi's disappointment. Yo, this movie is freaking nuts in that the living brother of a man who was murdered by the communist purge, and then all this really happened. the brother of the murder victim goes amongst his in the village the killers who are responsible for this, and outside of the fact that he's going to approach these killers, what's even more insane is that these killers live amongst this the village of people where they once went through there and committed these genocide. And the next door neighbors have to live next to the people knowing that this guy next door to me was responsible for the death of my loved ones, my husband, my brother, and they have to just take it. And so this guy goes to these people who are responsible for the death of his brother, and he confronts them. And it is the most profound thing I think I've ever seen on the screen. It's insane to me because for him to there's so many different levels psychologically that it's boggling my mind on that the things that this man has to is dealing with emotionally, and what he has to process emotionally and psychologically and vice versa. And it's inspiring, it's sad, it's tragic. It's one of the most brutal looks at the horrors of human nature that I've ever seen. It's a companion documentary to The Act of Killing, and it's done by the same filmmaker, Joshua Oppenheimer. And I would say like these are two essential documentaries. But yeah, the fact that Adi, chose to overcome the tragedy of losing his brother at the hands of these killers who live amongst him in his village, the fact that he chose to deal with that tragedy in this way, to me is something that is extremely incredible, and I still can't believe it. But yeah, that's my number one, my fistful of overcoming trauma.
That is a stunning, amazing documentary and a hell of a story.
Yeah, really incredible.
Pair that with The Act of Killing, and you will learn some things.
Yes. So yeah, hit us up on social media, listeners, and let us know what your fistful of overcoming trauma is. And yeah, you can find us at ItModcast on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can find the Turtle Dork at the Turtle Dork on Twitter, at the Turtle Dork 1 on Instagram, and at Brian William Young on Facebook. Wife Dork is at Sidewalk Siren and at Bake Dork on Twitter and Instagram. And Mouth Dork is at Mouth Dork on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Letterboxd, and Untapped. And Indie Dork is at WB Das on Twitter and also on Instagram. And I am Darren Smith, the Disco Dork, on all social media at the Disco Dork. That's going to do it for us. Thank you all for listening. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Go watch some movies. Thank you all for listening.
Go see Halloween.
Go see Halloween. And until next time.
And then read my essay. No, not until next time, because you have to read my essay about Halloween on aftermoviediner.com. Now you can finish the podcast.
And then go see The Hate You Give.
Oh, yeah.
And then go see The Hate You Give. All right. And that's it?
Yeah.
All right, good. And thank you all for listening. And until next time.